Welcome to the Destiny of Manufacturing podcast, powered by the Precision Metal Forming Association. We're so proud to have them involved in this podcast. I am Dean Phillips, and I am your host today. I'd like to thank everybody for helping to make this show what it is and help getting the word out to everybody. So please click, like, share, do all that good stuff to try and make sure that we're reaching more people and spreading the word to all of manufacturing. So with me today from GennFlex and Gakuto Club, Mark is here today from Mark Giertych. Thank you so much for being here. So tell me right off the bat, what do you see as your big takeaway for the next 5 years?
My big takeaway for the next 5 years is that manufacturing in America has to grow, and we don't have the skilled workforce to basically implement the growth needed in manufacturing.
Excellent. Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's a challenge that I think most companies are faced with today. It's tough to find a solution for that. Tell me a little bit about how we feel today about Industry 4.0. What are you seeing from companies and where are they?
So with Industry 4.0, we have a lot of these larger companies that are working on implementing it. So we have like the car manufacturing companies, these big organizations that have the capabilities to be able to make sure that all of their different integrated cells are working well together, they're communicating with each other, there's, somebody overseeing all the issues that are popping up. Um, but what I've seen personally working with some of the smaller manufacturing companies is that there's still companies that are struggling to implement Industry 3.0, which is something that's been around for, 40 years at this point.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that when we look at that, is that a challenge because of education, or is it more because of the companies not knowing where to even begin or start?
I would say it's a combination. So automation is a big undertaking for these companies. They don't really, they either don't realize it going into trying to automate their work, or they do realize it and they're kind of scared to do it. And that's something that you see this in all combinations, whether it's a company that has just bought a robot that they're trying to, so they've just bought their first robot and they're trying to use it for material handling, machine tending, something relatively simple, but the amount of time and money that's required to actually implement it to the point where you're actually getting a return on investment is so large that they're just not able to do it because they have orders to fill still. And they
Right.
might not have the trained workforce needed to be able to implement these integrations.
Gotcha. So you feel a lot of it is just it's a combination of the
hmm
scenarios there.
Yeah.
And
So there's a lack in education in the workforce when it comes to, working with automation like robotics or PLCs or machine vision or even, CNC machines. But it's also just that it takes a lot of work. So you need the people to be able to do the work.
right. I think that is something that people often overlook. They buy equipment with the idea, wow, this is going to solve all my problems, but not realizing that there's still an educational component that is
hmm
required in order to take that to the next level. And the trained workforce is critical to that.
hmm Yeah, there's a heavy investment, not just a money investment, there's a time investment and an investment in their employees that's required. And a lot of this falls on the shoulders of the employers where, it might not be fair to be, you know, putting putting that on the employers so that they have to make sure that their workforce is fully trained after hiring them.
Right. And where are we today in the workforce here? got this graphic up here. Where do you feel we are in this journey
Um,
of workforce?
so this is from a study from 2018. So this is before COVID, showing that there's going to be 4.6 million U.S. manufacturing jobs to fill. And the same study says that about 2.8 million of these jobs are going to go unfilled just from a lack of trained workforce for this environment. Now, like I said, this is before COVID, and one thing that COVID taught us is that we really need to step up manufacturing in America because we can't always rely on these international trade or so there's these large disruptive events that could make it so that we needed to rely on our own manufacturing.
Yeah,
So that was kind of a wake-up call for everyone, and you're seeing in the last few years people kind of looking at the problem and saying, okay, so how are we going to solve this issue? We need to really ramp up manufacturing in the United States.
yeah. And when we look at uh, ramping up manufacturing in the U.S., I know that you guys have done an awful lot of work on the side of that with Gakuto Club and GennFlex. What what things can you tell me about where that fits into the solution for this?
So GenFlex is a company that was founded to develop standardized training. So GenFlex focuses on developing curriculum and a standard hardware platform to implement training for different different areas of need, such as in robotics, in PLC training, in machine vision, in CNC training. There's the list is very long in
Right.
areas where we need training. So then Gakuto Club is a nonprofit, sort of a proof of concept for implementing this curriculum. So it's a nonprofit uh, manufacturing warehouse where we have basically orders that we're taking from customers, and those orders need to be fulfilled. It's whether it's fabricating metal or whatever orders we need to fill, and we are taking on apprentices to fill these orders basically. So this is twofold in that we're helping out local manufacturers, and we're also helping to train a new generation of employees. So we have a 16-week program that we're currently testing on two of our employees, Colin and Pat. And we have a video series that we're going through showing their progress as they go through. And basically just training them to become fabricators. And this involves teaching them skills in robotics, teaching them skills in welding, laser cutting, CNC machining. And the goal is by the end of this 16-week program to be able to place them into a job making 60,000 a year.
And do you feel like I did watch that video, by the way, and it is incredible. It's good to see not only them talk about what they're doing, but talk about a little bit about why it's important, uh, why they feel it's important to them, but also from a bigger picture standpoint of why it's critical to be manufacturing. And I think that, and I'll link to that video here on in the show notes. And that it's it's a great tool, I feel, to get the word out that manufacturing isn't what people think it used to be. Uh, that's not to say that it doesn't have its challenges. For instance, there's a lot of times where we go out there and we think we're going to integrate and we're going to be running hundreds of robots, but a company struggling to get one robot working in their factory. So
Mm-hmm.
tell me a little bit about your background. How did you get involved in manufacturing?
So I started out working in repairs for CNC machines. So I was doing board level repairs for the different drives that are operating the motors. And I got a few years of experience. I like working. I liked it because I'm working with my hands. I'm using my brain, doing a lot of problem solving. But then our company decided that we're going to start to try and push into automation integration a little bit. So I moved over to that side of the company and I started working on robotic integrations. And I did a few, at these small machine shops. And when you go into a machine shop, you think that you're going to be walking into, like the GM factory or something like that, where there's, hundreds of robots working in tandem. There's one person walking the shop floor and they're just pressing a button and everything goes. But the reality is you go into these machine shops that have, 20 to 100 employees, not very big, but they're outputting a lot of parts and they're just hanging on by a thread. They're just doing everything they possibly can to meet their orders. If they're trying to bring a robot in to alleviate some of these issues, they're finding that the amount of time involved in the amount of time invested in implementing this robot is just way too big, way too expensive. So they'll get it in there. Maybe they'll have an integrator set up a program for them, but then if they need a new program, they don't know how to add a new program. Or if the machine goes down, they don't know how to repair the machine. There's basically a lack of skills among their employees and just a lack of employees in general, uh, where they can resolve a lot of these issues that pop up and really get moving into the future, basically. So to where their output can be much higher, 5, 10, 20 times higher than what it is.
Right. Yeah, I find that in my experience with manufacturing, with education, people think that it's just, well, I just buy the equipment and away I go. But they don't realize how many hours it takes of training somebody to do something. And don't get me wrong, I am 100% understanding that a lot of these things have improved greatly
Hmm.
compared to where they used to be. You pretty much needed a computer science degree to program a robot when you
Yeah,
started.
yeah,
Today it's improved. How has that gone too? Tell us a little bit about that.
yeah. So if through working with these robots, I've found that the programming is pretty straightforward. Like you said, you used to need a computer science degree to be able to operate these robots, but now it's basically if you can build a flow chart, then you can program a robot. It's just all about learning the language and being able to implement it. And because it's a lot of point and click, so it's really not as difficult as a lot of these companies or employees think that it is. It's mainly just you need to get the training, and that takes a little bit of time.
Right. Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier, and I think I've seen a lot of companies like that where they have an integrator come in and the integrator programs one or two parts, but they never learn the skills of programming it, and they still are just as lost as if they didn't have the piece of equipment to begin with, because they cannot do the things that they need to do to make that piece of equipment productive in the way they
Hmm.
need it to. And How how is Gakuto Club fiddling that? How does that work? I know I've watched the video like with Colin and Pat and see their progress, but they don't talk too much about it, at least not on the first video of how they've adopted some of the skills.
So the first thing that we did, taking them on as apprentices, is we ran them through our 4-day robotics training course. So this basically gives them the foundation for operating the robot. Um, we teach them how to program, what different types of programming scenarios they can run into. You learn some mathematics like coordinate planes and stuff like that. So that was the first step was we teach them the robotics, and then we have them focused on fabrication and welding right now. So then we move them into the shop floor where they work with our professional welder who kind of shows them what they need to know about welding to be able to have a robot do it. And then basically we put them on the cell and we have them start programming for the cell to produce parts. So it moves pretty quickly. From within the first 2 weeks, they're out on the shop floor uh, doing fabrication with robots.
Yeah, that's pretty phenomenal. I I wanted to talk to you a little bit about where you think we are as far as those types of apprenticeships.
So one thing that Gakuto Club does, if you look at this apprenticeship example, so we look at employer involvement, on-the-job learning, related instruction, rewards, and credentials. Um, the way that apprenticeship programs work in general is these are all handled by different organizations. So it can be a little bit disjointed because you have to rely on a college to provide the training needed. You need to rely on the employer to provide compensation, and there's a lot of investment by the employer. Um, the credentials might be by a different organization. So we've basically combined that all so that Gakuto Club handles everything. So when we take on an apprentice, we're providing them the compensation, we're providing them the on-the-job learning, we're providing them the theoretical learning. So we kind of operate in an 80-20 split, where 80% of the time the apprentice is practicing and doing work themselves, but the other 20% is spent on teaching theory and the skills that are required for what they're about to practice.
I got you. And you guys work with NIMS too, so that it
Hmm.
has uh, a recognition level of
Hmm.
that testing, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we work with NIMS and ASTM. So NIMS is where we get the credentials for our curriculum, and ASTM is where we're developing standardized platforms to provide this training.
I got you. That's great. And if we look at how do we get to that next level of manufacturing here in the US? Well, one of the challenges I think that personally that I've seen that's different. When I was younger, I was doing I went to a vocational high school which had a lot of value even today compared to my college, which a lot of the things are outdated, the microprocessors that we used or uh, the learning on an Apple IIe that really doesn't add any value today. Now, I mean, you learn the basics of it, but at the end of the day, it's still you would have to take an updated class in a lot of these things. But the basics that I learned in vocational high school, residential wiring, motor AC theory, and all those kinds of things still apply. Nothing has changed in those aspects.
Hmm.
How does Gakuto Club and GennFlex work together to take things to that next level?
So the skills needed for manufacturing, as you said, is a lot of what you can learn just through, like shop class. And looking at a lot of high schools don't even provide shop class anymore. So people are coming out of high school thinking, okay, time to go get a 4-year degree. And then you go and get that 4-year degree, and you see that a lot of what you're learning is theory and not a lot of implementation, which is good. You need to learn a lot of that theory. But for manufacturing, it's not necessarily required. So what we've been doing is we've basically been trying to fill that void. So there's kind of a gap between what you learn in high school, what you learn in college, and in between is the hands-on skills that you need in all of these different fields that you don't really haven't really taken into account. And so we are providing training uh, to try and help fill that gap. And another issue that you run into too um, is flexibility is an issue, because a lot of the education provided, if we were to teach somebody on 10-year-old equipment, that's going to be obsolete now. And what you learn on that 10-year-old equipment isn't going to be able to be applied to what's needed now. And everyone knows that technology is moving crazy fast. So there needs to be a flexibility so that the platform can adapt as, something becomes obsolete. You can bring in the new equipment that we need training on, and then, just keep adapting the curriculum as it goes.
Yeah.
So with our curriculum, we plan on working with high schools. We plan on working with community colleges. I think that those are two areas where a lot of this training can be done also. And basically providing them a place where they can give students that are interested in this type of training or this type of career path a place to go train.
Right. Yeah. That I think is important because you also integrate, since you're fulfilling orders for manufacturing, they are getting a more hands-on approach, but you're also getting the feedback from the real world industry to say, yeah, this is important to us. This skill is important to us. So that when that apprentice goes out there, they have that feedback. How has that worked for you?
It's worked pretty well. We work closely with local manufacturers, and we get the feedback from them where they tell us, okay, we are really lacking in people that have these skills, and we're pretty early in our development of our programs, but we have basically taken into account this feedback that we've gotten to kind of know where we need to train people.
Yeah. It's interesting because I hear people all the time say, hey, I need a tool and die guy for the stamping industry. And that is probably one of the most needed positions. But a lot of schools teach machine shop or machining, but tool and die is a different animal. And
Hmm.
sometimes you do need to have that feedback loop to explain to some of these schools that machining and tool and die are very much akin to each other, but they are still different in many
Yeah,
ways. Uh,
yeah,
and
that's there's so many different areas where there's need and there's not a lot of people that really understand those skills of where there's this need.
Absolutely. Well, we're just about out of time here, Mark. Tell us, I'd like to thank GennFlex and Gakuto for putting this together. Tell us, last question, why are you involved in the PMA, and what benefit does it uh, provide for manufacturing as a whole for you from your standpoint?
Well, I basically became involved in this area because, like I said, I went on some of these integration projects and I saw that there's a massive need for training and there's a massive need for skilled labor. And um, yeah, I found that this is a great industry to work in. There's a lot of room for growth. I really enjoy the problems that arise because there's a lot of problem solving involved. I have to use my brain a lot. I also have to use my hands a lot. That's a combination that I really enjoy. And I thought that I could, help improve manufacturing in the United States, just with my own training of people and helping to develop this curriculum.
Yeah, that's tremendous because I think it's important that we explain the why to students and to the next generation why it's important. I've talked about before of why I'm involved and why my company gets involved is because uh, we build equipment for safety and for controls. And one of the things to understand is that this is why. Why do we
Yeah,
do it? Because we want to make sure that people go home at the end of the day with all their fingers, and they go home in the same way as they came to work. And I think that's something that that's important that we communicate why to everybody, especially the next generation of manufacturing, why what they do is critical. It's not that you're making an automotive component, it's that automotive component that you're making is important to the safety of that vehicle and keeping people safe and getting from one point to another and being productive. That's I think something we're lacking in communicating in manufacturing sometimes. So tell us, how can people reach you, Mark?
You can reach me on LinkedIn at Mark Giertych. I think I'm the only Mark Giertych on LinkedIn.
Okay,
You can email me at mark.giertych@gakutoclub.org. And those are probably the two easiest ways.
great. That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a eye-opening experience to see what new opportunities there are for training our people for the future. And I want to thank you for all that you do and all your hard work. And I want to thank all of our audience and say thank you. Go out and make them.